my beautiful bookish besties. Welcome to my channel. My name is Olivia. If you're new here, my name is still Olivia if you're not. I'm so glad you decided to click on this video because today we are going to talk about all the books that I've read so far this year. So I promised you all at the beginning of the year that I would start doing monthly wrap-ups. And listen, I have a good excuse for not doing one in January because I only read 4 books and I DNF'd the 5th one. So I didn't exactly have a lot to share, but I just felt like 5 books wasn't enough to create a decently lengthed video. But instead of 5 books, we now have 19 books to talk about because I read the 5 in January and then I read 14 in February. So that was my bad. We have a lot to catch up on, and I promised you guys I would do more wrap-ups. So even though these are not my favorite videos, I'm not doing anything special with this, I do want to just give you guys my thoughts. I'm not good at articulating my thoughts and feelings, especially when it's been like 2 months since I've read some of these, but I know you guys really enjoy these videos. You can always follow me on Goodreads. I do give little snippets of reviews of the books that I read, and I do rate them over there. So if you're not following me on Goodreads and you want to see what I'm reading in real time, you can follow me over on Goodreads over there. So if you're ready, I'm ready to dive in. We've got my iced oatmeal cookie latte in this Christmas cup because it's the only thing that was clean at the moment. And we have my handy dandy reading journal that is really going to come in handy for these wrap-ups. I write down a lot of my thoughts and my ratings and things like that. But grab your own coffee, grab your own snack, do what you gotta do to settle in, and let's chat. So like I said, I'm not going to talk about these in any particular order from like least favorite to most favorite or anything like that. I'm just gonna tell you this is the first book I read this year up until the most recent book that I have read. So in the month of January, I read 5 books, which was a total of 2,029 pages. I read 5 books physically and I DNF'd one of them. I gave 1 4-star and I gave 3 5-stars to equal an average rating of 4.75. So needless to say, that's a pretty high rating to start out this year, and I had a very good reading month in January. It has been a pretty good reading month in February because my average rating was still around a 4. So far we have been off to a great start this year, and the first book that I read in January was for my book club, which automatically makes it a great start to my year. If you guys don't know anything about my book club, I run it over on Patreon. We read and choose a book for each month, and then we have a live discussion. And the first one that was chosen was A Fragile Enchantment by Allison Saft. This book is the epitome of spring and cottagecore and light academia and everything light and fluffy you could want in a young adult romance book. This was not only light, fluffy, and fun, but there were so many deep one-liners that I shared during our book club discussion that really hit home. This book is for the people pleasers or the recovering people pleasers. There is no way our main character Neve is not a type 1 that loves to please everyone, that puts everyone above herself. And in this story, she learned to put herself first, follow her heart, and really just go for it and go for and pursue this guy that she really loves, even though they're not technically supposed to work out. I loved the simple, easy, magical system where Neve would weave emotions into her clothing. Overall, I just thought this was a sweet book. It really gave me those Bridgerton Regency vibes, and it was a grumpy sunshine trope, so if you like that, this will probably be the book for you. I did end up rating this 4 stars, which is pretty good. I feel like 4 for me is that was really good. I would recommend it. 5 is like perfection for my all-time favorites. I don't give out a lot of 5 stars. I feel like an average rating for me is usually 4, but this one was above average for me. It did drag a little bit in the middle, but I really enjoyed the humor and the friendship dynamic and kind of the found family trope in this story. It was fairy tale-ish, it was swoony, it was just really fun. It was like the perfect light read I needed to start off the year. I did just want to read you one of my favorite quotes that I tabbed in here because, again, people pleaser here, and this just really hit home for me. In this portion, we have Kit talking to Neve, and he says, "My point is, if your family really loves you, they'd want you to be happy. They'd be fools for not recognizing how much you've given up for them or how talented you are. You don't need to work yourself to the bone. You don't need to do things for people before you ever think to do a thing for yourself. Whatever you think you have to prove or learn, it's all in your head. Your existence alone is enough. And if you believe you've made no difference at all to anyone, you're even more clueless than I thought." I am always beating myself up like I'm not doing enough, or I'm not enough for my friends, or am I pleasing my family, all of those different things, and I just love how he preached to her. I feel like that will forever stand out in my mind. Okay, so I lied. I didn't realize that was not the first book that I read this year. The first book that I did read was Ruthless, Vows by Rebecca Ross, and this just kicked off my year on a great start. I feel like there's always so much pressure to pick your first book of the year, and for me, I just wanted to stick to a tried and true. I wanted to stick to an author I knew I would love, a series, or just something that I knew I was going to give 5 stars. This was obviously 5 stars. I'm not going to go into super depth of my thoughts on this. Even though I did give it 5 stars, I feel like in my mind it was really kind of like a 4 or a 4.5, because you just cannot compare it to Divine Rivals. Like, Divine Rivals was it. Divine Rivals was swoony. Divine Rivals had mystery. So many things that I love in a book. I was so pleasantly surprised with how much I loved that one. There's just something about it that was very different from the first one, but I still fell in love with it just as much. I feel like in the first book, a lot of people were confused by the gods and the war and like, how does this all work together? But you do get a lot of your questions answered in the second one. So if you read the first one, you didn't really like it, or you were confused, I definitely recommend reading the second one. There's a lot more high stakes, there's a lot more happening, there's a lot more action in the second one, which I did enjoy, and the end had me in tears. I did predict one thing, but this series is just so sweet. Rebecca Ross can do no wrong. I have about 3 or 4 of her other books that I'm definitely going to be reading this year. She quickly became an all-time favorite author for me. Like, there's no turning back now. I would love to meet her at some point in my life. Her books just are everything I want in a young adult story. It's mature, it's lyrical. The writing you just can't compare to anyone else. It's just fantastic. So if you like mythology and you like romance, but like something that is a deep type of love and romance, like, just pick this up. It's so incredible. The next book I read was The Fury by Alex Michaelides. I loved this book. This book is now my favorite book of his. I think it's trumped The Silent Patient and it's trumped The Maidens for sure. And I think what I loved about this book is it keeps you thinking long after you finished it. At first, I was considering rating this a 4, but the longer I thought about it, and the typical mystery thriller rules that he broke in this book was just outstanding. It was so well done that I ended up going back to change my rating to 5 stars. At first, I wasn't so sure what I was going to think about this. It's basically kind of like rich people drama is what it felt like in the beginning, and that's not typically something that I love. But once we got to really know the characters and their background, I actually really ended up enjoying following these character stories and learning more about them. The only thing I can really compare this to is White Lotus, but definitely toned down like 10 notches. We have multiple friends and family members who go to this Greek island for a vacation, and then we're also following an unreliable narrator, and we have multiple perspectives, and so there is just a lot going on where you're super confused. But there's also this underlying Greek tragedy play theme that just makes you overthink everything that you've been reading. Like, when you think you know what's happening, you really don't. And this was just a thriller that I had never seen anyone else do before, and I think that's why I gave it 5 stars, because it was so smart, it was so fun. I loved the murder mystery and how it unfolded. I love when that happens, when you just know the basics up front and then you're going back and putting the pieces together after the fact, and then you kind of start catching on what's happening. writing, and I don't know, I just love that style and pace of writing, and I feel like this was written for me specifically. All of his books I've basically rated 4, and then this one has been a 5, so I will buy and read anything that he writes. The next book that I read in the month of January, and I'm so glad I did, because truth be told, I actually DNF'd this the year it came out, which I think was 2021, and that is A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. And most people know at this point you have to read ACOTAR before you read Crescent City. So it just makes sense that I had to catch up with this before Flame and Shadow. But the reason I put this down in the first place, I DNF'd it at 250 pages. I honestly didn't know if I was ever going to come back to it. Mainly because at first I was hearing people say, oh, well, this is just a spin-off, you don't have to read it. Or, oh, like, that's just Nesta's story and it doesn't matter with the rest of everyone else's story. That is definitely untrue. If you guys have been here long enough, you guys know I didn't read romance even like 2 or 3 years ago. So this was a completely new experience for me, but I just was not feeling it, so I put it down. Fast forward from 2021 to 2024, finally picked this up, and of course I gave it 5 stars. This book was amazing. The character development with Nesta is just phenomenal. The trauma she has gone through. She definitely has good reason for being this unlikable character in the beginning, and I understand now where she's coming from. Before, I just was like, oh, Nesta's just annoying. I don't care about her and Cassian. The sister moment that we got in the end with Nesta and Feyre, it was just amazing. And the way that the mask was weaved into this story, it was just so incredible. Need I say more? Sarah J. Maas always knows what she's doing. She always knows how to weave in mental health representation, trauma, amazing, powerful women into her stories, and this was nothing short of that. I love this. I loved every second. I thought it was incredible, and Cassian is now going to compete with Rhys for me. So the last and final book that I read in the month of January was No One Can Know by Kate Alice Marshall, and I'm saying I read this because I read 50% of it and I am counting it towards my Goodreads goal. Maybe you all feel differently about that, I don't know, but that's kind of just my rule for myself, and I was shocked that I DNF'd this. It's an adult mystery thriller. What Lies in the Woods that came out previously from her did amazing. Everybody would not shut up about it, and I was hearing good things about this one as well. So I spent full price on it, and I was liking it. The writing was good. I've read one of her other young adult kind of horror mystery thrillers and loved it. So I was already familiar with the way she wrote, and I knew I was gonna like the writing. But the story, the story was heavy. The story was super heavy. I honestly don't remember a ton about what it was about, other than there are sisters, I believe, that were like accused of killing their parents or something. And so we have the present day timeline where our main character and her husband move to the town where she grew up, back into the house, I think, where she even grew up, and one of her other estranged sisters comes to the town, and just some interesting family dynamics there. But then we also go in the past. I wasn't invested. The husband was terrible to her, like terrible. She's pregnant in this story, and the way he handled certain situations and things, I just couldn't get with it. There's just so many things that I didn't like. I didn't like any of the characters, and I understand mystery thrillers are more for the thrill and the plot and the story and the twist, but I just didn't care. So I DNF'd this. I don't know if I'm going to read any more of Kate Alice Marshall. I do own What Lies in the Woods, so I probably will try that one at some point, but probably not anytime soon. So in the month of February, my stats definitely changed quite a bit. We went from 5 books to 14 books. We went from 2,000 pages to almost 4,000 pages. I read 8 books, 1 ebook, 5 audio, and I gave 1 2-star, 2 3-stars, 5 4, and 6 5-stars for an average rating of 4.14. We kicked off the month of February with another 5-star amazing read by Miss Sarah J. Maas. Everyone was reading this, and I think this one took me a week to get through, which isn't bad for like a 900-page book, but I gave this 5 stars. I couldn't give it anything less than that. I am not not going to talk about this much at all because it is the third in a series, and I was kind of spoiled for the end of Crescent City 2, and I held off reading that one for a long time, but I finally stuck it out and read the second one so I could read this one, and I loved this. It's very, very, very different from the rest of her other series. From the other two books, this was really different, but this book was whiplash, y'all. There were 5 probably different perspectives. There was constantly action happening, constantly something happening, and it was so weird because the other 2 books were a pretty even pace, but this one was just like non-stop, left and right, things were happening. There's just a lot to understand and happen in this series, but I loved it. I love action, I love plot twists, and there was definitely that in this book. The next book, or 2 books, I'm actually going to talk about together because over on Patreon I have been doing a read along of the Hunger Games as well as a watch party. So each month we read one book and then we watch the movie at the end of the month. And what sparked my interest in wanting to do this is, first, I've never reread the series, and this is one of my favorite like movie franchises of all time. The cast is absolutely perfect, it's so well done. But also Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes came out, and it just kind of set me off on rewatching the movies, and I'm rereading the books and watching the movies again. Like, I don't get sick of Hunger Games. I love it. I love every single thing about it. So in February I read Hunger Games and finished it even though we had already watched the movie. I was just behind on the reading. And then I also started and finished Catching Fire, and I have had so much fun like tabbing and annotating these. They do not do Peeta justice in the movies with how funny he is in this book series. Like, he deserved more lines in the movie. I'm just gonna say that. But I forgot also how much inner dialogue or monologue is in these books with Katniss, and how well that Jennifer Lawrence portrays that in the movies with the looks on her face or her reactions or her emotions. She did this series justice. Even though we have a lot going on in her head with these books with details, she did the best that she absolutely could. But anyways, I'm not gonna talk anymore about this series. I know you guys have probably read it at this point, and if you haven't, you are really missing out. I'm telling you, these books are so much fun. This is what got me into dystopian in the first place. I love Divergent, I love Scythe, I love all of those books, but we have not seen anything this good in a long time. So this is my way of putting it out in the universe that we need another dystopian series that lives up to this, that is this good, because right now nothing can compare. The next book I read for a Valentine's themed readathon that I ran over on Patreon was Better Than the Movies by Lynn Painter. Lynn Painter is a romance author that I've seen around so much, but I've never read anything by her, so this was my first encounter with Lynn Painter, and I gave it 4 stars. I actually really thought this was so good and so mature, even for being young adult romance. My friend Rachel bought this for me because she's like, I need you to read it, I need you to experience Lynn Painter. She's one of my favorite romance authors, so I did it for her, and I'm so glad that I did. I did a romance reading vlog for this book, so again, not gonna go super into detail here, but I loved how this book wasn't just your cute little like teeny bopper, let's go to prom type of young adult romance. We got a lot of depth and emotion from our main character Liz that lost her mom, and she has a stepmom coming into her life, so she not only has to kind of deal with those issues and figure out how she feels about it and let this new person into her life even though she still loves her dad, but she's also dealing with like her first romance. And what I really liked about this is it was kind of like a love triangle, but not like your typical love triangle. In this book we have one of the guys that is pushing her towards another even though he kind of likes her himself, and so I just thought, I don't know, it was just done so well. We had a really good friendship dynamic. Liz has a best friend who she also has to work through issues with that because she's neglected that friendship since her mom died. And there's just so many realistic things in here that I feel like a lot of teenagers can relate to, even adults as well. And I just thought this was really well done. I own another one of her books, and I'm even more excited to see what her adult books are like. And also for that romance reading vlog, I read Lore Olympus Volume 4. If you don't know anything about this, it is kind of like a new adult Greek mythology retelling of Persephone and Hades, but it's more of like a toxic relationship type situation. So if you're not into that, I probably wouldn't recommend picking this up, but honestly, I'm not either, and I really fell in love with this series. I love the artwork and the depth to the characters in this series. I gave this one 4 stars because volume 3 has been my favorite so far, but overall this was just a good continuation. And we also got more background from some of the side characters because there is a lot of side characters. I feel like if I go too long without picking this up, I just forget who everyone is. This was fun. It was a good addition, but I don't think it's going to be my favorite in the series. So the next few books that I read were these small little novellas from a bunch of popular romance authors called the Improbable Meet Cute series. This was part of a series that Amazon released where there was audio, but there's also Kindle editions that you could download to your Kindle. And basically, just because it was Valentine's Day or Valentine's month, they had some of my favorite romance authors write short stories, and this was so much fun. I did skip over Sally Thorne's because I don't really like The Hating Game at all. Don't come after me, but I decided to skip that one. I feel weird not being like a completionist with that. The first one I read is The Worst Wingman Ever by Abby Jimenez, and you already know I gave this 5 stars. It was heartwarming. It was done so well in typical Abby fashion. There was a lot of her type of humor. I just felt like this was very consistent with her other books that I've read and loved, and I feel like when you get a short story, you just never really know how you're gonna feel or what you're gonna get. Of course, there was a dog in this one, like there is in basically all of her other books. Our main character was dealing with a family issue of her grandma dying, so she wasn't necessarily looking for love, but the way that these two characters met, which I'm not gonna give away, was just so cute and so thought out and so creative. Like, I love when we have a meet cute, but like it's not forced, and it's just, this was so well done. 5 stars, absolutely loved it. And then we have With Any Luck by Ashley Poston. I had very high expectations for this one because I love The 7-Year Slip, I love The Dead Romantics even more, but this one unfortunately was like a middle ground 3-star for me. I honestly can't even remember much to tell you what happened. As much as I love her, I hate saying that. I just remember that this story took place at a wedding, and I think there was like childhood friends to lovers. I think. You guys, that's terrible. I don't remember much about this, so unfortunately I had to rate it like a middle ground at 3 stars. But then Christina Lauren swooped in with The Exception to the Rule, and I gave this 4.5, maybe even 4. I probably should have rated it a 5, and just completely like took over the series for me. It was basically about a couple that writes each other emails back and forth every year on Valentine's Day, and it's just so fun to see the character development between these two. At one point they meet in real life, and at one point you don't think they're gonna make it or they're ever gonna be together because they're in different relationships, but once they do finally meet, it was just so good. I'm basically a big sucker for letters or mixed media or anything like that in my books, and the audio was done perfectly, so that was basically the perfect formula for me to rate this 5 stars. And then we have Drop, Cover, and Hold On by Jasmine Guillory, I believe. This book had so much potential, you guys, so much potential, but by the end the characters took a complete 180 and I felt like I was reading a completely different book. In the beginning we have this girl who always goes to this cozy bakery slash cafe situation down the street because she works from home, so she likes to get out of the house and she goes there a lot, and of course she has a crush on one of the bakers there. But because they're in California, unfortunately there is an earthquake that keeps them hostage inside of this bakery, and they're forced to get to know each other even better that way. And let's just say there was like some spice and stuff at the end. Like, again, it was just cute and wholesome in the beginning, but by the end I was just like, I don't even feel like I know these people, so I feel like I had to rate it a 3-star. Last, I read Royal Valentine by another author, I think Sarai or Sarah Wilson, that I had never read from before. I can't even remember what other books that she's written, but I was like, you know what, let's give it a try. Maybe that'll give me a taste to see if I will like something else by this author. And I actually ended up giving this one a 2-star, and that's not because I didn't like it, it's just because it was nothing new and there was nothing nothing in particular that I loved. It was basically about a girl that was a princess and she just is tired of the princess life, and so she switches out with someone else who plays princess or her for the day, and then she goes and just like explores, and she runs into this guy who's a photographer. They end up exploring and falling in love, of course, and just different stuff happens with that. But this was just okay. Like, it was nothing special. It was nothing memorable. Didn't really like either one of the characters. The accent of the male for the audio was just like really cringy. I was not a huge fan. Overall, this was just nothing special, so I feel like you could skip this one in the series. So technically I started this Christian nonfiction in January, but then I finished it in February because it just takes me longer to get through Christian nonfiction. I like reading one chapter a day or a couple chapters a week and highlighting and sitting on it and praying about it and just really meditating on what the author or God's trying to tell me. And so I did finish this one in February called Reactivity by Paul David Tripp. It is how the gospel transforms our actions and reactions. I've read so many of his books previously, but I didn't even realize that he came out with a new one like a year ago, and this one was so cool and so needed, especially for people that have a social media platform like I do. This book was just a great one to start my year off with. It was so insightful with how I want to handle social media, how I present myself on social media, but also the toxic side of social media that sometimes you don't see, but it does exist. But there's all sorts of spiritual topics that related to social media that I had never thought of before. Like, the chapter titles are Wholesome Talk, Sin, Grace, Identity, Glory, Eternity, Selflessness, Limits, Values, Dignity, and Presence. And I highlighted the crap out of this book. He basically talked about how social media can provoke a lot of people to anger. They feel like that because they're behind a screen, they can say and do anything they want, because people just forget there's real people on the other side of that screen. And I just wish that the world would show more love, whether it's social media. I feel like there's just so much darkness and manipulation that can go on the internet and social media, and this was just really eye-opening in how it relates to the church and my identity in Jesus and just so many different things that I was like, whoa, this kind of makes me want to delete all my social media accounts and just forget that they even existed, to be honest. It's definitely not going to be a book that's necessarily for everyone, but I encourage you, if you are a Christian that's also on a social media platform, to pick this one up and give it a shot because it was really insightful for me. The next book that I read that I am so thankful to NetGalley for sending me an early copy, because I basically read this the minute that I got it, or I started it at least, and that is Darling Girls by Sally Hepworth. Dare I say this was her best book yet. I think you all will be pleasantly surprised because The Soulmate was a 3-star for me. Really sad. It was just depressing. It wasn't what I expected from Sally, but this book was full of your typical Sally humor. The first half and the second half was like a very serious, kind of hard to read story, but it was so impactful and it was very eye-opening. This book hit home for me specifically because I have 2 adopted sisters that are from or went through the foster care system, and these girls in the story also went through the foster care system. And just know there are quite a few triggers in this book with child abuse. It's very hard to read the way that this lady manipulated them. I feel like this topic is not talked about enough. The banter between the sisters, like I said, and the humor was just perfect. It reminded me so much of my sisters. Each sister had their own issue that they were working through, but once they shared that with each other, it was just so beautiful to see them come together and get closer because of that. And I just loved the way this ended as well. Like, the twist was just so well done. It was incredible, and I highly recommend this book. I think it's now gonna take my #1 spot for Sally's books. The next book that I also read for a vlog, for my romance vlog, is Bride by Ali Hazelwood. This was my first Ali Hazelwood book ever, and I honestly swore off ever reading her books. I knew they were spicy. I knew they just weren't gonna be for me. I like those cute, wholesome, and I just know that her books probably will not be that for me. And I decided to randomly pick this one up on a whim. It's fantasy romance, and I was like, you know what? I'm kind of intrigued. I'm not a huge vampire girly, but let me just try this. And let me say I was pleasantly surprised. I gave this one a solid 4 stars. It was definitely gritty and kind of reminded me of Rachel Harrison's books, where we have a very powerful female lead and she just does not take any crap from anyone. But her sarcasm and how she handled certain situations was just so amazing. I laughed out loud. I was very intrigued by the mystery. Basically, our main character's best friend goes missing, but she also has to go off and marry the werewolf king, kind of, basically, I guess you could call him, but she's a vampire, so they're not supposed to be together. Like, they're 2 different species. So that was kind of an interesting dynamic with that. But then he also has a younger sister, and she was adorable. She was so funny, and our main character just hates kids. And it was so fun to see her kind of be attached to her by the end. I really love that dynamic. I wish we had more. I highly recommend giving this one a shot. I know it's not going to be for everyone, but it was really fun up until the end for me, and overall it was just a really good time. Okay, last but not least, a book that I picked up on a whim, which I am currently vlogging or have vlogged, so I'm not going to share any thoughts, but that is The Naturals by Jessica Lynn Barnes. I've read The Inheritance Games and I gave it 3 stars. Haven't continued with the series, don't really have any plans to, but let's just say after reading this, I'm reconsidering it. So this book is 11 years old. Of course, it got cover redesigns, but I think this was one of like the OG like YouTuber, booktuber, mystery, young adult thrillers back in the day, and that kind of deterred me from wanting to read it because young adult can be a really hit or miss for me. It was a lot darker than I thought it was gonna be, but it was really fun. So stay tuned to hear more of my thoughts in a vlog coming soon. Alright, my friends, you are now all caught up on the books that I've read so far this year, except for the 2 books I've already completed in March, which I'm very excited to talk to you about. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. If you think there is a different way or a more entertaining way I could do this, let me know. But honestly, I just like going through these books and sharing with you what I remember. Very candid thoughts over here, nothing too crazy. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this. I know a lot of you have missed my wrap-ups, so here we go. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Stay tuned for my March wrap-up, and I will see you in my next video.